Allow me to set the stage. First, imagine you're entering the broken ruins of some ancient fortress. You've been here once before, recently, but your travels have brought you back, one last time. You walk into a grand hall, with its tattered banners hanging from the rafters, their colors faded beyond recognition. The place appears to be abandoned, and yet every suit of armor has been arranged into uniform lines, as if they're soldiers waiting for inspection. Then you hear it, footsteps approaching from somewhere beyond the throne room, steadily, confidently. What looks like a knight emerges into the torchlight, wearing armor from some fallen kingdom in ages past. It seems familiar, but you weren't paying enough attention during that particular class. Its heraldry is still visible, and its sword appears to have been polished quite recently. And through the visor of its helm, you see two piercing red pinpricks of light. Interestingly, this is the second time you've encountered this foe, having previously, through great effort, cut it down and scattered its bones across the premises. And yet, here it is, resuming that very same vigil. I think it's clear at this point, you're facing a Death Knight, and you're in for another long fight. But before we ask how such a creature might be defeated, first we need to understand what allowed it to rise again in the first place. First of all, what exactly is a Death Knight? Well, to put it as simply as possible, Death Knights are the undead remains of an exceptionally powerful warrior, typically one of great renown. Many of them were once royal champions, military commanders, skilled fighters, and especially paladins. And through a process that I'll cover later, combined with the input of malevolent gods or demonic powers, this warrior has been changed fundamentally. Now, that's not to say the Death Knight doesn't remember who it was. In fact, it's the exact opposite. While its body has decayed, the warrior's intellect and martial knowledge still remain, just as sharp if not sharper than before. It remembers how to fight, it remembers how to command, and it certainly remembers the names of those who it thinks wronged it. But if you have the misfortune of coming across one of these creatures, what exactly are you likely to see? Well, the specifics are going to be unique to the individual Death Knight. However, there are usually some telltale signs. You'll likely see a decayed or skeletal body, 6 to 7 feet tall, hidden under fine but ancient armor. This armor might be accompanied by the shredded remnants of what used to be noble clothing, adorned with a cloak, a crest, or even a crown depending on the subject. They'll likely be carrying an ornate weapon, noticeably glowing with necrotic energy, and the eyes will be pinpricks of red or orange light. Furthermore, they'll oftentimes retain the names and titles they had in life, and may even demand you address them as such. Honestly, many people, myself included, naively thought that these were just uniquely powerful undead, no more, no less. After all, this world has no shortage of powerful undead. But this undead is different. Each one is distinct, with its own motivations and aspirations, oftentimes linked to certain events from their mortal life. They may even think they're still pursuing some noble goal even after all these years. It's a type of cognitive dissonance, and usually they have the inability to admit that they were wrong at any point in the past. So these memories and the foes found within them distinguishes them from lesser undead. It becomes the warrior's personality, with all the pride that comes with it, trapped eternally in the worst moment of its existence. So now that we know that the creature before us was once worthy of some position of power, the next question is, how did it become unworthy of a true death? Well, let me start by saying there's no single universally accepted process for becoming a Death Knight. Temples, planar scholars, necromancers, they've all got their own conflicting stories in this regard. Some traditions describe Death Knights as cursed paladins who broke their oath, while others speak of warriors who pursued undeath willingly. So with that in mind, let's start with the modern and most widely accepted explanation. It's that of the fallen Paladin that abandons their sacred obligations and commits some terrible act, and dies without seeking forgiveness or atonement. This ultimately catches the eye of some dark power, who claims their unrepentant soul and raises the body as a Death Knight. This curse preserves everything the Paladin once valued, from martial strength to authority, and the ability to retain everything in between. The warrior remembers exactly what was lost and why the process occurred. However, pride frequently prevents them from admitting that the punishment was usually deserved. Then there's an explanation found in some older necromantic accounts, that of the forbidden ritual, where the warrior chooses the transformation of their own accord. They willingly seek out a ritual, or someone who would be willing to enact one, which will ultimately separate their soul from their mortal body. Though I will say, finding a genuine ritual can be difficult, because, well, oftentimes temples will destroy that knowledge. And worse still, some of the more devious actors will spread false rituals as a trap for those unwilling to do their due diligence. However, if they do find a genuine ritual, usually they'll be required to do one or more of the following, such as sacrifice someone they love, spill innocent blood using their chosen weapon, or even offer their service directly to some powerful entity, like Orcus for example. As you can imagine, the purpose of this ritual is typically very personal, whether it's seeking revenge that can't be completed in a single lifetime, fear of some divine judgment after death, or the belief that even the descendants of an enemy must be punished. This is all very deliberate, and the warrior understands that the cost is their soul. Though I have to wonder how many of them would go back and do it again if given the chance. So we've talked a little about how one might become a Death Knight, but who discovered this process? Who was the first? Well, interestingly, it seems like most of the races on Faerun have their own unique legend. The Elven legend involves a warrior who believed that a rival of theirs had stolen the person that they loved, after which some wicked fey creature would offer them the power needed to defeat that rival. However, halfway through the story, the reader finds out that it was all lies, and the warrior discovers too late that the rival was innocent, and the supposed beloved never even truly loved them back. Obviously, this causes them a great amount of grief. That grief turns into rage, rage turns into murder, and the warrior turns against everyone involved, and ultimately embraces the darkness already burning within them. The Dwarven legend speaks of a king who simply couldn't bear the thought of leaving his throne. Over time, he began to see rivals among his relatives, his retainers, and even his very own children. So one by one they were sent into exile, or had their deaths arranged by sending them into certain battles unprepared. And with no heirs and no kin, he would claim the throne for eternity by becoming a Death Knight, as well as transforming his loyal retainers into undead servants. Some versions of this legend claim that the undead king still to this day sits on his throne and rules over a kingdom, hidden away and buried beneath miles of stone. Humans actually have several competing legends regarding the first Death Knight, and they all bear a common theme. A man or woman wanted power, received it, and with that dark power, the newly made Death Knight accomplished their goals. The Death Knight might have been tricked or cursed, but in these stories, the means are considered less important when compared to the ends. Sometimes it's tragic, sometimes it's triumphant, but the stories always teach that great power allows the wielder to achieve great things, even if the price is a cursed immortality. And lastly, the Halflings, perhaps the oldest story of the first Death Knight. It tells of a famous warrior who was consumed by revenge after being denied a position he believed was rightfully his. He would go on to flee the kingdom in disgrace and take up residence in some fell land inhabited by demons. There he would come into contact with the demon lord Orcus and begin proving himself by destroying his enemies and minions alike. And when the Lord's cultists offered him the power to enact vengeance on those who wronged him, he readily accepted and became the first Death Knight. Whatever the truth is, there's a good chance we'll never find it. However, you can see the commonalities between these tales: passion, pride, revenge, reputation, the inability to accept their circumstances, and a fall from grace because of it. But let's move on and take a look at what powers are afforded to someone who suffers a fall like this, and what that allows them to do in combat. So as we've seen, the Death Knight was already a pretty formidable opponent before undeath. The curse doesn't really teach any new martial skills. In fact, it preserves and intensifies the already existing abilities. Moreover, the Death Knight has decades or even centuries to refine their technique. They don't get tired, and they certainly don't become impatient, since time is always on their side. And with that age comes a form of wisdom. The Death Knight has likely fought warriors from across several generations, so there's a good chance they might even recognize styles that are no longer taught today. This also applies to certain tactics that might only be known to historians. And because of their pedigree, they study the battlefield like any commander would. You know, narrow approaches, high ground, escape routes, things like that. And as an undead marshal, they'll take these variables into account and direct their soldiers accordingly. But let's start by looking at the Death Knight as a singular opponent and go from there. Physically, these guys are strong, and they possess an endurance beyond what you'd find in the stoutest barbarian. They're completely immune to any type of poison or necrotic energy. They can also resist any attempts from clerics to turn undead, and they afford that very same protection to their servants. And they simply cannot be frightened, so I wouldn't even try. Then we come to the blade. This oftentimes is an extension of the warrior's identity, and it usually tells a story. A story from before, during their mortal lives, a weapon that meant something to them but has now been corrupted during their transformation. Necrotic energy seems to flow from the weapon, and it's strong enough to take the lives of most challengers in one precise strike. Certain necrological accounts claim that the very same curse that changed the warrior into a Death Knight also binds their soul into their chosen weapon, and by removing it from the knight's hands during combat, one can distract or even physically weaken them. But be careful, because anyone else trying to hold the cursed blade will likely suffer damage inflicted by the imprisoned soul. Then there's the Hellfire, the Death Knight's most infamous display of supernatural power. You've seen a fireball, right? It's kinda like that, but not quite. The Death Knight can summon a sickly green ball of fire and hurl it up to 120 feet from where it stands, blasting anything in a 20-foot radius. But it's not a projectile the way a fireball is. It simply appears wherever the knight chooses, and can even wrap around corners if need be. These flames are beyond powerful. They can blast through armor, flesh, and pretty much anything else with ease. Some of the older accounts I've referenced even claim that this unholy fire is uniquely dangerous to the living, more so than you'd think, and can even empower nearby undead. So my advice to you is spread out. Oh, and we can't forget the spells, the dark miracles granted to the warrior during their transformation. They can do everything from dispel protective enchantments, hold their foes completely still with nothing more than a word, and even cast a spell known as Destructive Wave, which can knock even the stoutest warriors to the ground, on top of the damage it causes. And they can even summon a spectral steed that allows them to engage in mounted combat. These usually take the form of what's commonly called a nightmare. You see, it's a clever play on words. Nightmare, mare, horses, you get it. And it's believed that the creature that serves as the knight's mount in death is oftentimes the same beast that carried them in life, just altered through the transformation. This amount of power would make any solitary creature a real force to be reckoned with. Death Knights, however, typically aren't found by themselves. As I said before, in life, Death Knights were typically those in positions of power, and nothing has changed in death. They now have the innate ability to command the dead, and can often be seen at the head of armies of shambling skeletons and zombies. And commonly that means the undead under their control will be found acting like a real army, everything from marching in ranks to maintaining watches. And these armies will be surprisingly diverse, with skeletons as your rank and file, zombies as laborers or siege troops, whites or other intelligent undead serving as officers, and then there's the aspirants, once mortal soldiers and heralds who followed their commander and willingly joined it in death. These creatures usually make up the honor guard, as they're seen as the most loyal, and their proximity to the Death Knight grants them a measure of their general's power, making them dangerous foes, second only to their leader. Oh, and did I forget to mention, even if you somehow find your way through all of this, you confront the Death Knight in combat and win, it can simply return. The body can be destroyed, the weapon incinerated, its hellfire put out, but the victory is ultimately temporary, because after a 10-day, the creature will simply manifest the new body, usually at a location of personal significance, whether that be the keep where they reside or the location of their evil deed. Each new body brings the same memories, the same trauma or problems that damned it in the first place, except now it'll add one more name to its list. So even if you manage to take it out, chances are that's not the last you'll ever see them. Because the reality is, the return is an integral part of the punishment this creature was cursed with. It can't escape its history simply by being slain. The powers that be won't let it off that easy. It's a cruel fate for a cruel person, and no story demonstrates the dynamics of this sentence better than that of the Knight of the Black Rose. This is a tale from across the material plane, from a world known as Krynn. What's that, you ask? Well, to keep it simple, imagine another world beneath another sun and a different sky. That explanation will have to suffice, unless you want to spend the next 30 minutes discussing crystal spheres. Nevertheless, we're going to learn about an entity known as Lord Soth, the Knight of the Black Rose. Probably the best case study and most well-known example of a Death Knight. But Soth didn't begin as some servant of death. He was once celebrated throughout the land of Solamnia for his courage, discipline, and skill with a blade. He had risen to the highest order of its knights, and to those who knew him only by reputation, Lord Soth appeared to embody everything a knight ought to be. But as it turns out, the circumstances of his fall from grace would begin within his very own household. Because although he was married to Lady Corinne, he would become infatuated with an elven priestess named Isolde de Nissa after rescuing her company from a pack of ogres. He then brought Isolde back to his keep and began an affair with her behind Lady Corinne's back. However, when Corinne later gave birth to a horribly malformed child, one that was said to reflect the corruption within Soth's own soul, he accused her of infidelity, and in his fury, murdered both mother and infant. This crime was eventually exposed, and Soth was condemned to death by his fellow knights of Solamnia, but he would end up fleeing with the help of his retainers, and barricade himself inside his keep against those who were sent to deliver justice. Even then, redemption wasn't out of the question, not entirely. In fact, Isolde had received a vision that told her Soth could prevent an approaching cataclysm. However, he would perish in the attempt. And I think we should be clear about the scale of this oncoming disaster. This wasn't an ordinary war or natural calamity. Cities would be erased, kingdoms drowned, and the face of the world itself would be violently reshaped. Think of the spell plague. Soth believed he had been given a chance to prevent all of it, and for a time he accepted his fate. So he rode towards his destination, prepared to exchange his life for the world's salvation. However, during the journey he was told that Isolde had betrayed him, and as such, jealousy overcame his duty, and Soth would abandon his quest. He would then return to Dargard Keep, just as the cataclysm began. Fire swept through the fortress, causing Isolde and their newborn son to be trapped beneath a fallen chandelier. As Soth approached them, Isolde begged him to at least save the child. he would sadly deny that request, and so Isolde, with her dying breath, cursed him to live through all the lifetimes of all those who had perished in the cataclysm. Lord Soth died in the flames of Dargard Keep, a fire so fierce that even the stones burned. The ensuing flames stripped away the knight he had once appeared to be. Within the scorched armor remained only a blackened corpse, with burning points of light where the mortal eyes had once been, and the rose engraved on his breastplate, once a symbol of Solamnic honor, was charred black, giving the fallen knight the name by which he would be remembered for years to come. Death offered him no escape. He would rise from the ruins of Dargard Keep as a Death Knight, forever sealed within his black armor. Soth retained his intelligence and even a distorted remnant of his knightly honor. He understood precisely what he had done. Perhaps that awareness is what makes his punishment so complete. And every night, his own dead would sing the story of the moment he could have chosen redemption, and instead turned away. It seems as though, no matter the tale, each account of a Death Knight ultimately begs the question, can our subject ever be redeemed? The short answer is yes, but how? Well, modern lore states that only atonement or recompense allows any given Death Knight the chance to escape the cycle. However, the definition of these words can vary based on the subject. After all, atonement requires more than just regret, because regret can be selfish. Genuine repentance typically concerns the harm done to others. Usually, the knight needs to acknowledge responsibility without adding any extra excuses. Furthermore, they might need to make an effort to repair whatever damage they caused, and this can take a while. For example, there's the tale of Miltiades, who was an early paladin of Tyr and a champion of the city of Tyrell. During a years-long siege, the circumstances of Tyrell were beginning to look pretty dire, and out of desperation, Miltiades would sneak into the enemy camp and slay the commander in the dead of night. Now, being a paladin of Tyr, the god of justice, this was greatly frowned upon, and even though Miltiades would die in the process, Tyr would bind his soul to his corpse, leading to one of the first known examples of a Death Knight here in the realms. But there is a difference between Miltiades and most other Death Knights, because he would continue to strive to serve the greater good, despite his condition, and as such, after 1,000 years, Tyr would finally grant him his redemption. Seems a bit harsh, but I suppose Tyr holds his people to quite a high standard. So yes, there is a road to absolution, but the specific journey clearly depends on the subject. Hell, even our example from earlier, Lord Soth, would eventually receive a true death. After centuries of solitude, he finally admitted the wrong he had done, and even turned his back on Takhisis, a god of evil and control, when she demanded his service. This would obviously enrage the goddess, so she restored his mortality and then brought Dargard Keep down upon him. So in the end, Soth at least died with some measure of his honor restored, and it's said, in his final moments, he thought of the wife and child who he had failed, and hoped to earn their forgiveness somewhere beyond death. So ultimately, despite being creatures of pride, violence, and control, the final enemy faced by a Death Knight is rarely the warrior standing in front of it. Most oftentimes, it's themselves. Okay, so we're back in the throne room. The Death Knight is once again stood before us. Its army scattered, its banners slowly curling in the breeze. What is there to say about this creature? Each Death Knight is unique, having their own story and their own personal failings. Somewhere in its past lies the cause of the curse, the reason it can't rest, and usually one truth that it refuses to accept. Most of the time, death was denied to these warriors because they refused to take responsibility, their punishment preserving and even enhancing their strength. However, in the process, they lose every virtue that made that strength worth admiring in the first place. That is to say, at least in my opinion, the Death Knight represents the ruins of honor, recognizably noble in shape, but hollowed out by the choices of the person within. Thanks for listening. There you have it, the Death Knight. Hope you guys enjoyed the more thorough inspection of these creatures, and if so, remember to like the video and leave a comment, you know, to please the algorithm and all that. Anyways, I'll see you for the next one, so be safe, take care, and happy trails.